This is a reading from Rays of the One Light, a book of prayer demands by Yogananda. This is prayer 128. I beheld thee hiding behind the flowers. I looked at a flower and prayed. Suddenly, O Father, I beheld thee hiding there. It exuded to me the perfume of thy presence. I saw the blush of thy purity coloring its petals. It was gold. Thy wisdom shone in its heart. Thine all-embracing, upholding power filled its delicate calyx. The mystery of life and immortality lay in the pollen lifted by the bee when it tasted thy sweetness. O teach me thy wonders of creation, which are hinted at in even the tiniest roadside weed. Good morning, friends. It's a joy to be sharing this Sunday with all of you. Also wonderful to see the group of people gathered here in person, although not the smiles yet, but the eyes say it all. And welcome all of you who are watching us online. I hope you can join us in person sometime as we are gradually opening up in a safe way. When I was thinking about this particular reading yesterday, I was reminded of something from a few weeks ago. This was a documentary that I was watching, I think on Netflix. And this was about a very, very famous public speaker, kind of a self-help guru, not a spiritual teacher, but somebody who's very popular and who has millions and millions of followers. And there was one part in the documentary where this person walks onto the stage and he's speaking to a room of perhaps a few thousand people. And he starts his talk with this question. He asks this group that has gathered there, the thousands of people who are cheering him and who are waiting for him to speak, and he starts his talk with this question. He asks, where does change come from? Do you believe change happens in one moment, in one instant, when you're touched by something so powerful and transforming? Or does change happen through persistent effort over a very long period of time? Now, given the context of this whole event and this person and his style of speaking and all of that, the answer was pretty obvious. The entire audience almost shouted in unison, change comes in one instant. Now, I had to pause the documentary at that point, not because I disagreed or anything, but I quite didn't know what I felt. I didn't know what was right, whether this was actually true. I wanted to first think about what I believed in. Do I really believe that change comes in an instant or change comes over a very long period of time? And as I sat with it, interestingly, the answer that came to me was yes and yes. And I couldn't explain it. It's not either or. It's not that some changes come in an instant and some changes happen over a long period of time. It was yes and yes. And a few weeks ago, I was with my friend Keshava, and we were driving somewhere, and we were in the car. And we were just chatting, and I shared this documentary and what I was thinking about with him. And he immediately said, of course, yes and yes. And what was more helpful for me was what followed after that. He asked a rhetorical question which helped kind of clarify this whole piece in my own head. He asked, how are babies made? Are babies made in an instant, or are they made over 10 months? Yes and yes. It's not either or. It's, as Yogananda ji explained, the two cells come together when the sperm and ovum unite. There is a spark of light in the astral world, and immediately all the souls that are in tune with that vibration immediately rush to bring life to that cell, and that's how the person incarnates. So the person is made in that instant. That light enters that cell, and immediately that human incarnation has already begun. But at the same time, it takes 10 months of laboring. It takes constant nurturing by a mother to grow that human person until at the end of 10 months, he can actually make a physical appearance and you see a baby. So in a sense, both of the answers are true, but it depends on the context and at the level at which we are asking. And it is true for all of us because all of us as humans, we exist on so many different levels. We are simultaneously functioning on all these different planes. The most obvious is the physical gross plane, where we all interact, where our entire reality is defined by what we perceive through the senses. We perceive through the senses and act through our bodies. And that reality is pretty consistent in itself. It's not that there are holes in there that we need to explain through something else. But also we know that there are other realities of our own existence, even our mind, which often cannot be explained just on the material level, what to speak about the will, and even subtler energy, vibration, and all these things that we are deeply, deeply influenced by. We exist on that level too. And the topic that we have today, the title of that topic is Deeds with Intention, and what we are talking about is, in one sense, on the individual level, what we do in this world, how we act, and what's in our heart, how sensitively do we hold these things in our own heart. But the same is also true on a macrocosmic level, which is just the contrast between the inner and the outer universe, what this world looks like, and what is beneath it, what is behind it, what is the intention, what is the energy, what is the power that is driving it from beneath. And we have this interesting verse from the Gita that Swami presents in this commentary. And this is a verse that comes very early on in the scripture, in the second chapter, in the first chapter, which is titled quite appropriately, The Despondency of Arjuna. For those of you that don't know, Bhagavad Gita is this conversation happening between Krishna and Arjuna on this battlefield. The two of them represent the guru and the disciple, and Arjuna is being asked to fight his own cousins, his own grandfather and others of his family for many reasons. It's also symbolic. I'm not going to get into that right now. But Krishna presents this verse to Arjuna where he says the self is never born, the self never dies, the self is always existing, and it is not slain, it is not affected by anything of this world. And you think about that, of course, I've heard this before, I understand all scriptures, all true spiritual teachers teach us these same principles. But also I think of myself in Arjuna's shoes for just a second, and all I can say is, but it doesn't look like that. Here I am standing on this battlefield trying to fight my own cousins. The people who are standing against me are people that I dearly love, and I'm seeing bloodshed. This is a real battlefield, and I'm seeing violence. You're asking me to do violence myself. And then you're telling me the soul never dies. But what about all this that I'm seeing? What about these people that will, for all practical purposes, cease to exist in my world? All the life experiences, the hopes and desires, and everything that has defined this person is going to come to an abrupt end. And that is not a reality that is specific to the battlefield of Kurukshetra. That's just the reality of life. It is so consistent in its own way and flows in this beautiful fashion, and then it all comes to just this abrupt end, as if it doesn't make any sense. And it is hard to reconcile. It's hard to reconcile these two questions, what we see on this material plane and what Krishna preaches to Arjuna, because again, it is very hard to reconcile all levels of existence just with the rational mind. We have figured out this world in an ingenious way. We understand everything, we at least seem to understand everything, and over the thousands and millions of years that we have inhabited, we have figured out a lot of things. We've figured out how to put gasoline in an engine and make it run at 100 miles an hour. I don't know how it works. Or even more magically, we know how to convert data into zeros and ones, push it down a wire, and suddenly, from your living room, you can access the whole of this world. There's no way to describe it except magical. I'm speaking this as somebody who actually went to college for computer engineering, so at least I understand the theory of it. I know that this is supposed to work, and yet it is mysterious. And we have figured out all of that. We have figured out the entire mechanism of nature. We have figured out the laws of physics, and we have learned how to make it work in our favor for our own comfort. And yet, we have not figured out anything in the sense of understanding the design behind all of it. We don't quite know why life happens the way it happens. It is still mysterious. It's like the mechanism is so clear, and yet the design is so mysterious because it is not of this level. And if we constantly keep trying to dissect it with our brains, we don't have any answers. Here I am who has figured out all of this, but I don't quite know why my friend succumbed to this grave illness all of a sudden, why this person was so healthy, and why this person was so successful. He made a lot of money, he accomplished great things in this world, And suddenly now he has fallen down and he's facing a hardship and he does not have enough money to get by or whatever it is. All these different things. I was supposed to get that. I worked so hard, but I didn't. This person did not even work that much, but he has all that he was desiring for. None of it makes sense on just that material plane. Somehow, the design is still mysterious. And again, we are being asked by all these scriptures, not just the Gita, but every scripture everywhere, to find those answers within. That as much as this world looks so consistent from the outside, it is not going to give us the answers that we are looking for. That somehow there is something behind and beneath all of this. And this is not something that we just learn from a scripture. It's not something that we read in a book or somebody told us and it made a lot of sense. We learn that through experience. We go through these experiences over and over again that cannot just be explained just from the mechanics of this world. And life happens to us. And then gradually our heart softens and we learn to see things differently. We learn to realize that, yes, there is something called the soul. Yes, I do feel certain things that I cannot quite explain in this moment. There is this energy behind all of it. I can feel this sense of peace when I enter this space. I feel good when I'm with this person. And all of this, as much as the mind is so busy explaining over and over again, it is happening on a very different level. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is the first, or not the first, which is the oldest known treatise on yoga that we have today. Patanjali was a great Indian sage, and he was an avatar, actually a self-realized being, as Yogananda ji describes. And hundreds of years ago, he wrote this scripture, which is actually rather small. It contains a lot of aphorisms that we call the Yoga Sutras. And this entire scripture begins with this one aphorism in Sanskrit, Atha Yoga Anushasanam. And in English, it is translated as, and now we come to the study of yoga. Thus, therefore, we come to the study of yoga. Now, I was thinking about it yesterday. If I tried to start writing an essay on my computer and started with "and now," I'm going to get a red line beneath those words, and my computer is going to tell me that I'm doing something wrong. I need to correct this. Of course, Patanjali knew better. It was not a mistake, and thankfully he was not writing this on a computer. So he did start the scripture that way, and now. And what he's implying, people write treatises just on this one verse of the Patanjali's sutras. What he's implying is this point that we reach of consciously seeking a spiritual solution, of consciously trying to find this connection within us. A lot precedes that. A lot has already happened, and that is why you're here reading this verse. That's why we all are here, gathered on a Sunday morning. That's why we opened that book. That's why we saw that video on YouTube. That's why we felt we wanted to start meditating, because a lot has happened. Whether in this incarnation or many, many previous ones, over and over again, through these experiences, we learn the simple fact: the world is not what it looks like. That everything that I experience through my senses, as much as it is consistent, it does not explain everything. There is something behind this. There is something that I cannot put my fingers on, and that is the answer to everything that I'm seeking. That the freedom I'm looking for, the joy that I'm seeking, is not going to come just from here, from all the things that I see and touch and feel, but it's somewhere behind it. I read a book when I was 17 or 18 years old, right out of high school, that changed almost the trajectory of my life. It was, it was a very interesting book. There was something that the author said in that book that made me think, that made me sit with it for, I would say, months or even years. And it was a very, very simple argument. He was talking about New Age physics and spirituality and Eastern teachings and all of that. And he said, this whole world, we experience it through the senses. We experience all of reality just in 5 ways. We can either see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it. Those are the only ways we can experience or relate to anything in this world. But what makes us think that everything in this world can just be reduced to 5 abstract aspects of its being? And somehow we function, and that's the miasma of delusion. That's the nature of creation itself, that we are inclined to function. We are tempted to always think that's all there is. That's all there is to this world. That I see this tree is brown in color, it's 60 feet tall, it has these kind of leaves, and that's all defines that tree. only because I can experience only in these specific ways. And gradually, through our own experience, we learn as our consciousness expands, as our awareness deepens, as life teaches us step by step by step, we start to realize maybe there's more here, maybe there's something subtler. And constantly, as we read every week in the festival, we are faced with disappointment, we are faced with troubles and suffering, and through that we learn. Through that, we start to see, we start to wonder, is there more here? And that's the point we come to. That's the point we come to when we open the Yoga Sutras. I don't know how many people actually open the Yoga Sutras. They're pretty cryptic and difficult to follow, but we find something. We seek something, whatever it is, that is going to bring more meaning, that is going to make more sense for us to understand and move through life. I was thinking about it yesterday in the autobiography of a yogi, which I assume most of you have read. You know, there are so many instances. This is such an important thread that Yoganandaji picks on throughout the book. Of course, there's this one famous example that immediately comes to mind when you read this particular passage from Swami's writings of Yukteswar, Yoganandaji's guru, and Yogananda in the ashram where they're being troubled by mosquitoes, and Yogananda wants to just, kill the mosquito, and he restrains himself. Maybe I shouldn't do this in front of my guru. It's an act of violence. And then Yukteswar immediately reads his mind, and he says, the death blow has already been struck in your mind. Why don't you just finish the job? And then he goes on to explain the fact that you committed the act of violence in your mind in itself was already done. That was that flow of energy you set into motion. Now, whether or not it manifests on this plane, whether or not you actually do the deed is almost secondary, because you already have created that ripple that you now have to neutralize. And again, there are so many examples. I was thinking of the time when Yogananda, he walks away from the ashram, and he's seeking an experience. He wants to have this experience of samadhi, and he's seeking this one saint who's called the sleepless saint in the autobiography. And he goes to the small town in Bengal called Tarakeshwar, and he passes through the temple, which is what the town is very well known for, but he does not enter the temple. You can see his own mental dialogue in the autobiography where he says, why this God has to be sought within the soul. God has to be sought within. Why would I bow? Why would I bow in front of a mere stone image? And then he walks away. And then, I won't tell the whole story to you if you have not read the book. I recommend you to read it there. But a lot of things happen, and at the end of the day, the saint tells him, oh, I noticed that you did not bow to the temple when you passed there, and no wonder you had to go through all these hardships before you could ultimately reach your goal. And then you wonder, but it looks like a stone image, but it's more than that. It does look like a stone image, but it is so much more, because there is something behind it, there is something beneath it. And that's not of this plane. It's not like there is some magnetic thing that is buried inside the stone image. It is something that is not of this plane, that cannot just be explained by the rational mind. Another beautiful example, which is one of my favorites in the autobiography, is this chapter about Master Mahashaya, who was this great disciple of the avatar Ramakrishna, and Yogananda had a very sweet relationship with him. And both of them are walking somewhere in Kolkata, and they hear these loud cymbals and music played by these devotees of some temple, and it's almost ruckus. And Yogananda, in his own mind, is judging constantly how unpleasant it is to hear that music, and how sweet the divine is, and how this music does not really fit this ritual or this place of offering. And again, Master Mahashaya walks and he reads Yogananda's mind, and he simply starts by saying, isn't the name of the divine so sweet no matter whose lips it comes out of? It looks like it is unpleasant. It looks like these people are just making noisy music. It's not pleasing in any manner. But then he again comes and reminds, it's not what they're doing. It's what they hold in their hearts. Think about it. These people are trying so hard to offer something, to bring themselves and make this devotional offering. And it may not sound as pleasant. It may not sound the way you want it to. And yet, we learn to see what's behind. And constantly, we are being asked to, we are being taught. Again, in the autobiography, coming to the chapter on Kriya Yoga itself, this is one of my favorite quotes that I often use when I write or speak, where Yogananda says, Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga, for those of you who don't know, it's an advanced meditation technique which is the core teaching that Yogananda brought to the West. He says Kriya Yoga is an airplane route to God. And when you hear something like that, especially if you want to be skeptical, the first thought that would come to your mind is, oh, of course, one more person who thinks his path, his guru, his techniques are better than everybody else's. Of course, why wouldn't he? But then, that is not at all the place from which Yogananda is speaking. Even if you read the whole paragraph, which I've read a few different times, he starts by saying, in contrast to the bullock cart route of the theological approaches to the divine, Kriya Yoga is an airplane route to God. What he's talking about is this contrast between the inner and outer universe. He's not trying to say my guru and my techniques and my teachings are better than this other person's. Absolutely not. What he's trying to say is a technique such as Kriya Yoga, when you start to learn to work with the inner reality, with the energies in our own spine, then our own capacity to shift, to change, is so much more. And in relation to all the theological approaches, the right spiritual living and ritual practices, anything that we can do on the material plane, all those feel like going on a bullock cart. They're all noble, they're all the right things to do, they're all helpful in our own spiritual growth. But the rate at which we move when we are simply working on this level is much slower. And when we are able to draw that energy in, when we are able to directly work with the inner reality, our own capacity increases. We are able to move faster. I did not quite plan it this way, but we are coming back to that same question that we started this whole talk with. How does change happen? Change can happen right this moment if we are able to draw that deep within, if we are able to use that power of spirit that is so much more accessible when we ourselves are subtle enough in our awareness. We are able to sensitively work with the inner reality. And if we are simply engrossed with the senses, if the physical reality in itself is all that we are aware of and all that we want to work with, it's so consistent and it's so unrelenting and it's so all-consuming, and if that's all our awareness is centered, then it is going to take a much longer time because that plane moves differently. And interestingly, like I started saying, all of this is happening all at the same time. There's this beautiful verse from Adi Shankara's philosophical treatise called Bhaja Govindam, where he says, even a moment in the company of a saint can be a raft on the ocean of delusion. Now, that is such an interesting statement because oftentimes we all seek the company of anybody we consider holy, any saint visiting or any great spiritual teacher. If you feel in tune with that vibration, immediately we think of this verse, maybe I should just go see that person. What is that power? What is that power that is transmitted? And then I come back home and I'm still the same. Have I changed? Have I not? It's still the same. I'm still facing all the same challenges. I'm still waking up in the morning, having the same oatmeal, opening my computer, answering the same emails. And yet something has shifted. Somehow, now I have access to the raft on the ocean of delusion, even without my conscious knowing, because that conscious knowing is caught on this plane. It is simply consumed by things I understand, things I'm working with, things I want to do, things I like, things I don't like. All of this is consuming my awareness. And yet, on a subtler level, I've been touched. And what we are trying to do on the spiritual path, it again comes back to this again and again, because all of this is convincing ourselves in a way, but to state it better, realizing that this world is not what it looks like. That there is this subtler reality that we are always working with, and change comes from there, no matter what it looks like. The child cannot be born no matter what you do for 10 months. It has to be born through that moment of conception. The same way change has to come because we are touched by that power of transforming grace. And again, we develop our sensitivity. This whole topic of deeds versus intention is implying that distinction between the inner and outer universe. The more we become sensitive in our own hearts, the more we are able to stay in touch with that reality. The more we affirm that reality, the more we try, the more we keep trying, then it becomes more accessible to us. Then we start living from there, and this world starts to look different. It is still unrelenting, it is still as opaque as it is right now, but then it starts to look as this play of light and shadow. It starts to look like the play of God. When things happen to us that are not expected, when misfortune strikes, we are able to see it as God's Leela, as the play of the divine, and not be crushed by it. And that's the power it gives us when we start living more and more on that level, is we are in fact able to relate to this world differently. We are able to see all of this as a way for our own growth, that every circumstance, every challenge, every trial that is coming to me is now somehow an opportunity. It's the grace of God that is now going to take me further in my own spiritual growth. And gradually we do that, both through life experiences, but more and more when we become conscious, when we reach that point that Patanjali is talking about, we do that through the practice of internalizing our energies, through the practice of meditation, by constantly drawing our senses in. And that is certainly going to accelerate this process of learning and growing. So, God bless you all.
Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays on the rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach all men how to spin clouds of gloom into light. Without silence, what is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not for men's woes, who would smile at our rose? Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone silence groan, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossoms all fade. Joy must sing in the night to face change unafraid. Nightingale, nightingale, night.